Welcome to True Talk. This is your host, Samar Jarrah, and I am in the studio. We're going to be going to Istanbul today. We're going to be talking to Ali Ahmedi. He is Executive Fellow at the Geneva Center for Security. We're going to be talking about the strike on the Gulf state of Qatar. Listen to this music until we come back. This is True Talk on WMNF 88.5 FM.
They say occupation, trying to hide that it's a genocide. I just wish a kid could grow up to see his mama. I wish that I could do something about bombs dropped on Gaza. Hurts so bad to know. Where do my tax dollars go? Murdered in cold blood. Poor young soul, all he knew was love. Turn to silence while I'm saying free Palestine from the tyrants. I don't even know if I could handle this pain. Every day's a murder, kids get put in the grave. Shot for his race, the place he was raised, when peace was the only thing that he ever craved.
And welcome back to True Talk. This is your host, Samar Jarrah, and I am pleased to be talking with Ali Ahmedi. Ali, Mr. Ali, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure, and I think I should say İyi akşamlar. Is that correct? I don't know.
I'm sorry?
İyi akşamlar. Do you speak Turkish? Or just?
I do not. I'm actually not a Turkish citizen. I'm an Iranian citizen that resides in Turkey.
So you don't know. Okay, it's good evening in Turkish. I'm practicing my Turkish with you. And okay, Ali, I just read actually a few days ago your wonderful piece. It's wonderful in the way you write it, but the news in it and the content is not wonderful, I have to say. And it was published in the Cradle, and the title is "Goodbye War on Terror, Hello War on Arab Sovereignty." And I find this really very disturbing title, and the whole article, really, I have been thinking about it for the past few days. I am originally an Arab and Palestinian, and I was born in Kuwait, and I lived in Kuwait and Lebanon and Saudi Arabia and Jordan and Egypt, and I have been living in the U.S. for the past 35 years. So I've always been, of course, interested in that part of the world and the U.S. relationship with it. And throughout these years, we thought that the U.S. will always maintain a very good relationship with the Gulf region, let's say. The gist of your article says not anymore. But before we delve into that, could you, Mr. Ahmedi, tell us about the historical relationship between the U.S. and the Gulf region? Like, did it start before the oil, or because of the oil, there has been a good relationship? Could
Sure.
you?
So, I mean, to go maybe a little too far back, going back to sort of the imperialist era, the beginning of the imperialist era, when European powers first started showing interest in the Persian Gulf region, usually for as trading posts, as military outposts, because of their proximity to India in some cases. What happened was they wanted to have military garrisons in Iran, in the Safavid. This is during the Safavid dynasty, and the Safavid dynasty essentially didn't agree because they had the military capability to resist that. And so this started a pattern of European countries essentially going south of the Persian Gulf to places that were, sometimes you have weaker Arab countries, sometimes you have areas populated by nomadic tribes that are not really states as we would think of them today. And they would make deals with them in order to have trading outposts and military outposts in the region. So fast forward that to the age of petroleum and the British Empire, you have the same dynamic. And then when the US is essentially taking the mantle from Great Britain, the same thing happens. These countries have, were under British colonialism for a long time. They have relatively positive relations with their former colonial countries, the UK specifically. And so it was just kind of a natural fit that the US military presence in the region would also be largely anchored in Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia to a smaller extent now, and the United Arab Emirates. So there's been a long-term relationship of colonialism, but then a positive relationship essentially is a counterbalance against Iran that has historically had more strategic depth.
I think this relationship, Mr. Ahmed, was tested after September 11, in particular with Saudi Arabia. So it survived. Was there like a different doctrine in America during the Bush administration that is not present anymore? How could that survive?
I think the thrust of U.S. foreign policy in the region was completely different at the time. George Bush was obviously, an oil man. His father was an oil man. And so they had particularly close relations with a lot of the GCC countries. And their attitude was very much that they want to have, especially after 9/11 with George Bush, that they want to have a significant amount they want to be the primary security broker in the region. They want to have a significant amount of military influence all across the region. And so for them, regardless of, there were 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi. But as far as the U.S. government was concerned, as far as George Bush was concerned, that is just a coincidence of a certain number of al-Qaeda recruits being Saudi. And in fact, al-Qaeda recruited so many Saudis for this mission specifically to undermine U.S.-Saudi relations, which is an argument many people have made and is credible. And so after 9/11, despite the public approval of Saudi Arabia being extremely low, the U.S. government actually became closer and closer and closer to the GCC countries, because the GCC countries were not only friendly to the United States, but they were also the platform from which the U.S. could project power. And so somewhat ironically, despite the fact that, al-Qaeda is maybe associated with like Sunni extremism, the primary barriers towards a more fulsome U.S. military power projection in the Middle East wasn't really the Sunni countries for the most part. It was Iran. It was, after the invasion of Iraq, it was Iran's sort of alliance network in the region. And so ironically, because of a lot of what unfolded after September 11, the U.S. became closer to the GCC countries and more anti-Iran.
And the U.S. started to have bases, which was not possible before because of maybe what the Saudis would say religious sensitivities. It happened, of course, after the invasion of Kuwait initially. But I want to move to Qatar because it's not a country that is quite well known in the U.S., let's say. Everybody knows about Saudi Arabia. People may know about Yemen because of the ongoing wars happening there. People know about Dubai, of course, from a different cultural, maybe influencer type of fancy Disneyland city. But when it comes to Qatar, I don't think people are familiar with that state, its size, its population, who rules it, and the fact that the U.S. has one of the largest military bases in it. Could you discuss the historical development of U.S.-Qatari relations?
Sure. Well, Qatar might not be very well known among the American public. It is very well known among folks in Washington because it has a very unique position. It's a very, very small country. It's a small peninsula coming off of the Arabian Peninsula, and its only land neighbor is Saudi Arabia. Critically with Qatar, they have a lot of natural gas. And so their exports of natural gas range between $50 to $70 billion a year of revenue. And that might seem like a good amount, but it's really extraordinary when you think about the fact that they have roughly a bit more than 200,000 actual citizens.
Wow.
There are also some migrant laborers who live there, some folks from other places from Europe who've gone there for like banking and things like that, much like to a smaller extent than Dubai, but in a similar way. But it has, considering its very tiny population, it has been this wealth is very significant, and it's been able to spend a lot of time, energy, and money lobbying Western countries. It has built a profile for itself among Western countries as a country that is a good interlocutor, a sort of a Middle Eastern Switzerland to some extent, that can help mediate. So if the Americans need to talk to Iran, sometimes this goes through Qatar. If they need to extract people out of Afghanistan or talk to the Taliban, that happens through Qatar. So it has Oman has a similar profile to a lesser extent, but so it is a place where its government has done a very good job diplomatically punching above its weight, using its powerful resources and using its geographic position. Critically, it should be mentioned that Qatar, despite being a part of the Gulf Cooperation Council, which includes Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Oman, despite being a part of it, it has always sort of had a somewhat separate foreign policy from especially Saudi Arabia and the UAE that are the primary foreign policy actors. So it's been willing to support groups like the Muslim Brotherhood. It's been willing to support groups that are seen as sort of Islamist to some extent, whereas Saudi Arabia and the UAE sometimes see these groups as a threat partially because of their anti-monarchist tendencies, but for other reasons as well. So this has always been sort of a source of tension between them. So
why Qatar, for instance, has this different political outlook vis-a-vis especially Muslim Brotherhood, and also we're going to be coming, of course, to having Hamas members living in Qatar, but I do not think this could have happened without agreement with the U.S.
In terms of them living in Qatar?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that's really one of the key points about this recent developments that people sort of misunderstand is that Qatar, despite its somewhat independent foreign policy, it was not hosting Hamas officials because it was going rogue or going against American or even Israeli demands. Both the Americans and the Israelis were perfectly fine and in fact very much in favor of Hamas's political office being based in Doha, because it is still, a place where Hamas officials can be kept an eye on. If they were more spread out, more decentralized, that would become a lot more complicated. So it is very much the case that they were there on Israel and the United States' acceptance. And it also should be said that we have had episodes. Now, some of these are rumors, reports. It's hard to know exactly what to believe. But I think that it's been well established that the Qataris, albeit hesitantly, would be willing to kick Hamas leadership out if the United States demanded they do so. They've kind of made that clear over the course of the last few years. So the fact that they were targeting Qatar in order to hit Hamas officials, as if Hamas was sort of secretly allowing these people to conspire against Israel in its territory, that's just absolutely not true.
Let me just remind our listeners, I'm talking with Mr. Ali Ahmadi, who is Executive Fellow at the Geneva Center for Security, and we're talking about Israel launching maybe 10 missiles on Qatar, an independent nation state that has the largest American military base. So what happened, Mr. Ahmadi? I mean, the Qataris says we were not warned, or maybe the U.S. called us when the bombs were actually exploding. Israel at the beginning said that they told Trump. Trump then said, no, they didn't tell me. I mean, it's like theatrics. What did really happen? And how could Israel jeopardize this relationship with the only country that is negotiating the release of the hostages in Gaza?
I mean, I think this is a story of on U.S. government haplessness and Israel becoming just increasingly confident with Western support. I mean, everything Israel's done over the course of the last 2 years would have been thought unthinkable some time ago, or at least a considerable amount of it, ranging from the genocide in Gaza to attacking Iran directly, starting a war with Iran, even though they knew they were going to get hit by missiles. So what happened was that the Qataris were in fact not warned. They were very adamant about that. There was no warning from the United States. And the Trump administration has been sort of quietly telling reporters that they were frustrated with what Israel did. But this all just sounds very much like the Biden administration. The Biden administration would always sort of quietly tell reporters, oh, we're actually very frustrated with Netanyahu and him, invading this part of the Gaza Strip or doing that. But ultimately, Israeli officials talking amongst themselves seem to indicate that no, in fact, there was very little pressure on them at all in these circumstances. Israel launched this attack on Qatar. The official target, of course, was the Hamas leadership, who were meeting to discuss a peace proposal that the U.S. had put together for them. Mm-hmm. And there was even some talk that this sort of hasty, half-baked way this U.S. proposal came together was just sort of a ploy to get people in Hamas officials in Doha sort of in the same building in order to have this meeting. I don't know if that's true, but I find that there are questions there that need to be answered. And this was definitely, I think, more than anything, a warning to Qatar, because Israel has obviously for a long time seen Iran as its number one adversary, but as it's as the Europeans and the Americans are more interested in supporting its military actions directly, even against Iran, and Iran's axis of resistance around Israel has receded. They're looking for essentially other enemies. And so this brings them to Qatar, and this brings them to Turkey, where Qatar has, because of its support of some Islamist groups over time, and they have a closer relationship with Hamas than, say, Saudi Arabia does. This also presents a threat. Qatar's powerful capacity to lobby in Western countries sometimes has friction with Israel's preferences in these lobbies. Turkey, you have a sort of similar story where they now have a tremendous amount of power in Syria. And Israel doesn't want them to have any kind of any military equipment in Syria that would impede their ability, their capacity for action, their ability to either use Syrian territory as a platform from which to launch missiles at Iran or to just bomb Syria. So this puts Israel in greater tension with sort of other forces in the Middle East. And I think this was very much a sort of a shot across the bow, or shot directly, I guess, at Qatar, a warning to them.
This brings me to the name that you mentioned, Mr. Ahmed Khalil al-Hayya, who is a member of Hamas. But I do not think that I don't need to put words into your mouth, but was he a worthy target, or just like you said, it's a way for the U.S. and the way for Israel to show their power, their ability to bomb anybody, anywhere, anytime, regardless of international law, regardless of any defense system, regardless of the fact that they have the largest military base in Qatar. So, because, let's say they killed Khalil al-Hayya. He is not Khalid Mish'al, but let's say they killed Khalid al-Mish'al. I mean, when you have people fighting for liberation, in their mind, the Palestinians, they will always have a new person that will come and lead the mantle of liberation. So what is it? Is it really Khalil al-Hayya in particular that survived it and his son died, or it's the hegemony of the region?
It definitely is the hegemony. I would say that is definitely the primary reason for this strike. Wasn't really because they thought this would hamper Hamas. It would hamper potentially Hamas's ability to deliberate about whether or not to accept peace agreements. Right? If you're attacking military officials, militia officials, or whatever in Hezbollah or in Hamas or something of the sort, then you could argue that this perhaps degrades command and control capabilities regarding what force they're able to deploy. But when you're attacking what are essentially their diplomats, then that is obviously not going to inhibit them militarily. It is going to inhibit their ability to perhaps negotiate an actual peace resolution, which, especially if you look at what's going on now in Gaza City, is clearly not something Israel is interested in or has been interested in at any point in these past recent times, in past recent talks, if at all. But the hegemony aspect of it, of showing Qatar that you're actually not safe, that this country that you've built with all your fancy buildings, and I've been to Doha. It is a very beautiful place built with a lot of money, and it is like the UAE to a lesser extent in the UAE, reliant on a lot of people from other countries coming there to work, people coming there to participate in the banking sector or do tech innovation or things like that. And to bomb Doha itself shows that essentially, Qatar, you don't have the security that you think you do. Qatar does have a decent military, but its capacity to go up against a country that gets tens of billions of dollars of Western arms a year would absolutely have the insurance policy for Qatar in a situation like that is Al Udeid. It is the giant American air base that is the focal point of U.S. military projection in the region. It is the regional headquarters of CENTCOM, which is the U.S. military command in the region. That was supposed to make them immune to any kind of foreign attack like this, especially from a U.S. ally, and it didn't do that. Now, that's going to shake up a lot of things. They had a recent conference involving the Islamic and Arab countries. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's necessarily, that's more of a diplomatic kind of to make a public statement. But there's also the Qataris are going to have to rethink their entire security architecture, and so are other GCC countries. Because if obviously, the Al Udeid air base is a half an hour drive from where the Israeli missiles hit. There is no way that the Israelis did this without American approval and possibly even direct support. I mean, in the conflict with Iran, the Israelis were using, aside from like American jets and American missiles, they were also getting advantage from American, satellite capabilities and targeting capabilities and cybersecurity capabilities. So this is a huge wake-up call for the Arab countries that, having American bases in your country isn't the security policy that you think it was. Options does that? Yeah, go ahead.
I think Saudi Arabia already got the message, and didn't they do just yesterday signed an alliance with Pakistan, a military alliance, saying that Pakistan is the kind of a country that will protect us. And what's interesting is that the weapons, mainly, if I'm not correct, please correct me if I'm mistaken, most of the weapons of Pakistani army and military comes from China. It doesn't come from the U.S. So that's another significant development, I would say. Didn't Israel and America anticipate that Saudi Arabia might sign a military alliance with Pakistan?
I mean, there isn't. Maybe this didn't entirely look the case in the first few months, but at this point, it's really hard to look at American policy in the Middle East and think that there's some sort of strategic guidance here. I think that the Americans, Trump just doesn't have the capacity for whatever reason. He doesn't have the capacity to stand up to Israel, as Biden didn't, as Clinton didn't, as Bush didn't, as Obama didn't. But so he can't. He doesn't really feel like he's in a position to say no to them. That's at best. He may have completely supported this in order to allow obviously the article that you mentioned that I wrote. The thrust of it was basically that the United States has moved on from trying to have strong states that are allies of the United States and just trying to overthrow adversaries to just trying to keep the region divided and in a sort of these Westphalian, semi-sovereign countries that have no capacity to actually defend themselves. And so the United States and a lot of Europeans as well can sort of project more forceful power through the region just through arming Israel. because Israel is not only a country that wants to do this, not only does it have ambitions about, greater Israel or some of these things, but it also is willing to, for example, take a whole lot of Iranian missiles that maybe, the U.S. would not be willing, at least so far as its forces in the region. So it could be either one of these things. But in terms of the Saudi agreement with Pakistan, there's a lot that's to be desired there. First of all, an agreement like this between two countries like this haven't really been tested. The idea of having a mutual defense treaty where an attack on one is an attack on the other hasn't really been tested. Pakistan's ability to protect Saudi airspace is certainly not going to be significant. I think most of this was really about the fact that Pakistan has nuclear weapons. And so the Saudis this is their way of trying to get something remotely resembling a nuclear umbrella over them. But ultimately, their ability to actually withstand direct Israeli assault is not necessarily going to work with this, because Pakistan's Air Force capacity is limited. India's Air Force capacity is not as good as Israel's. And for Pakistan to operate that far away from its own territory is just not going to be possible, because you need a lot of different kinds of military equipment to be able to extend your range in that way. And Pakistan doesn't have that.
As I mentioned to you, Mr. Ahmedi, I am from that part of the world also, and I lived there in so many different countries. And of course, I follow it because of my background and education and this radio show. What on earth the Arab world is not doing for America? And like look at the reaction to the butchering and the genocide happening 24 hours on their TVs in Gaza. I mean, what more they want from these Arab nations that they want to subjugate them more to the level of destabilizing them and stabilizing their systems? Could you please help me understand?
I mean, honestly, that's something that I've been struggling with a lot myself, especially in the context of the European countries, the E3, which is Germany, France, and Britain. They've agreed to this sort of symbolic recognition of the Palestinian state that itself comes with a whole bunch of strings, but they're still all selling weapons to Israel. I mean, what they're and they seem to be all in favor of the idea of another war with Iran. And they, obviously neither Syria nor Lebanon have any power to do anything about this. And they certainly don't have the military equipment required. Probably neither does Iraq. And why it is at this point, I mean, all of the previous, explanations for Western involvement in the Middle East, concerns about terrorism. Well, you can't tell me that this kind of destruction of governance isn't going to create more terrorism. It's obviously going to make that situation significantly worse. That doesn't seem to be a concern for them. It's going to result in more refugee flows to Europe. Again, that despite what's going on in the domestic politics, that doesn't seem to be a concern for them. And in terms of the oil, I mean, the U.S. is now the largest producer of oil in the world. So what's going on in terms of oil production in the Middle East isn't completely irrelevant to its interest, but it's not nearly what it was in the 1970s. So ultimately, hegemony is the only real explanation you could come to. And the fact is there's opportunity. I've spoken to so many colleagues, European colleagues about, European thinking about Iran, and they say, well, the Europeans are very mad at Iran because Iran provided arms to Russia. That's at least one of the reasons. And I'm sure that's true. But considering what Europeans are doing in the Middle East, and considering the fact that obviously China's support for Russia is exponentially more important than Iran's, why aren't the Europeans, for example, taking up issue with China? The answer is because they can't, because they're still heavily reliant on China. They're not in a position to really pick that kind of fight with China, even though they've hardened against China a little bit. With the Middle East countries, especially considering the amount of destruction that Israel's shown it's capable of over the last few years, and the fact that sort of the axis of resistance around Israel has subsided, is degraded, so that it has greater freedom of action, means that they can it's hegemony on the cheap. They can basically project power into the Middle East in a very destructive fashion without necessarily worrying about there being consequences.
Could it be that they are setting a stage or planning in a way to do what they did to Saddam Hussein when he kind of invaded Kuwait? Before that, when he attacked Iran, and we ended up with a zero-sum battle for maybe 9 years where millions of people died on both sides. Do they want the Arab world to fight their fight in Iran the way they did with Saddam?
I think the Americans have. I think the other countries in the region have kind of come to terms with the fact that Iran-GCC relations are not going to be as bad as they were 10 years ago. That both countries realize that they've both Iran and Saudi Arabia realize that their very brutal competition has undermined both of their interests, and that there needs to be some leveling off. A lot of people didn't expect this diplomatic detente between Riyadh and Tehran to hold, but it very much has for that reason. I mentioned before is that it is really internal in these countries more than countries fighting each other. So countries like Syria or Lebanon have to essentially end up playing, their governments have to play the role of Israel's local enforcer behind, sort of under the guise of enforcing various increasingly dubious ceasefire agreements with Israel. So Lebanon has to have a civil war again involving Hezbollah in order for Israel to stop bombing it or maybe bomb it slightly less. And this becomes sort of the issue, is that when Israel has total freedom of action, it's going to increasingly it's going to be more and more demanding. And there's really, it's going to be a kind of a dark situation. Maybe this strike on Qatar wakes up some of America's most ardent allies in the region. I don't know. I think from the American perspective, they're just relying on the fact that Pakistan isn't really going to be able to save these countries. China doesn't want to play policeman in the Middle East. And so they're just kind of going to have no choice but to accept it.
I want to quote your article, Mr. Ahmedi. You say there is a new strategy. The U.S. is doing a new strategy, stability to fragmentation. You mentioned Lebanon and Israel. But let me read here. Under the new U.S. doctrine, the goal is not victory but paralysis. The preferred outcome is perpetual disruption of state functions, governance, security, and diplomacy, not merely military domination. Aren't they afraid that there will be spillover to the subdued Arab nations? Can you tell me how did you reach this conclusion? Because it's most disturbing that the U.S. is interested in paralysis and perpetual disruption of state functions, governance, security, and diplomacy. How did you reach this?
I reached that conclusion by talking to Western officials in general and American officials in particular, not officials, but rather some former officials, some colleagues, in diplomatic sort of think tank circles. And when I would try to figure out what the policy is towards various countries, it always seemed to come back to they basically don't really want this to be a country anymore. I mean, not that my colleagues don't, but the U.S. policy is kind of ultimately driving at this direction in effect, even if that's not necessarily how they're thinking of it. In Lebanon, obviously, the case is clear. Syria is another major example of this, where Israel doesn't really want Syria to be one country anymore. It wants a kind of Afghanistan situation in Syria, where it's just permanently no longer a viable, functioning country. And this is also their policy towards Iran. The German government literally set the Syria option for Iran. So they were hoping that the Israeli attack on Iran would somehow result in a combustion of the Iranian government and perhaps maybe civil war or some sort of thing where Iran becomes just a permanent basket case. That was the hope. So on their part. So this is what I see when I look at country after country after country. All the policy drives at the same direction. And I wouldn't have expected the GCC to figure into this equation, but things seem to be going in that direction as well.
But when, for instance, you mentioned Syria and Lebanon, they border Jordan, and Jordan has the longest borders with Israel, and half of the population of Jordan are Palestinian, and the other half is has intermarried with the Palestinians. Isn't this playing with fire? I mean, why do they always assume that their plots and plans will work? What if they backfire and there is a blowback? And because, there are young people out there, and we have seen here in the US, people just decide to take matters into their hands. Then they can use violence, they can use terrorism, they can use any term you want to use, but they can use armed kind of resistance. They can go overthrow very loyal governments. Like, aren't they playing with fire, especially Syria, Lebanon, Jordan?
I mean, I'll give you an example from a country on all the way the other side of the world that is a lot in the news now, potentially going to be invaded by the U.S. It was really the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, that imposed extremely severe sanctions on Venezuela. Mm-hmm. It was the previous sanctions were much more limited. And when Trump was deciding on these sanctions, he was explicitly told by U.S. government officials that if you do this and it works, and it breaks the economy of Venezuela, you're going to have a massive influx of Venezuelan citizens into the U.S., including undocumented immigrants. And Trump was fine with that. So, and flash forward to the last presidential election, and all of a sudden the presence of these Venezuelan immigrants was something that he was talking about is this sort of blight that Biden brought onto the United States and that he would fix. So when I talk to people about, what are these people thinking? Like, what is the end goal? What are they actually going to achieve here? It is some mix of they're much more risk acceptant than they were before. If Jordan is going to be in pressure, that's up to King Abdullah to be able to handle that somehow. Hopefully he'll be able to handle it. And there is also a certain amount of, that is, they're not really thinking about the consequences. They're fixating on an enemy and going and trying to put as much pressure on that enemy as possible. And they're not really thinking about the second, third order consequences. It is a mix of this among sort of Western officials. But certainly especially with the Europeans becoming as hawkish as they basically were in the 1880s, then you're looking at a situation where they're willing to take a lot more chances and they're willing to allow a lot more instability. Stability is just in the region is just not really what they're looking for anymore.
Even if it can affect the flow of oil and the prices of oil, and it affects them and affects their heat and energy, they don't care. Is it because they have alternative sources?
I mean, that's a very good question. I don't think, with a strike on Qatar, I think they're really trying to sort of bring these countries to heel without destroying them. Mm. And, if you look at like Jordan or Egypt, obviously these countries are extremely compliant in various cases. And because there's a threat if they don't, whether that threat is military or that in the case of Egypt, for example, they're under a mountain of international debt that they need help with. So I don't think they're trying to necessarily create total instability in a country like Saudi Arabia. That's really more for like the Near East region. But it does seem to be the case, especially since the strike on Qatar, that they're also demanding a greater level of cooperation, I guess, to put it in a euphemistic way. The Arab countries must sort of do more to support Western ambitions in the region, including the ambitions of Israel, which is their primary vector for power projection.
Mr. Ahmedi, the Prime Minister of Israel himself says that his plan is to take parts of Iraq and to have a greater Israel. I mean, before, when I used to say that 10 and 20 years ago, people thought I was crazy or smoking something because, no, it's the only democracy in the Middle East. But now they have these maps that they display all over the government where they want parts of the Nile, parts of the Euphrates, parts of Syria, parts of Iraq, parts of Lebanon. I mean, why? I mean, I'm laughing here because I can't believe what I am hearing here. How could they think that all the population, all the 300 or 400 million Arabs in the Arab world will be quiet? I mean, they're mad and they're angry at what is happening to Gaza. The only thing they can do is give money and, assist them. But aren't they afraid of a different kind of Arab Spring, a bloody overthrow of many governments and ripple effect I mean, and there are no like reasonable people in the administration. With Trump administration, no. Okay. Okay.
I wouldn't say there's reasonable. Everybody in the administration is extremely hawkish, and whoever there is in there that said like, hey, maybe like, okay, so let's support Israel's strike on Iran, but let's not ourselves get involved. Those people got sidelined very quickly. I mean, the extent to which like Laura Loomer, who is a sort of this right-wing agitator who, eats literal dog food on her podcast to like promote a brand of dog food. This person is a very strange kind of right-wing gadfly type figure. She is now extremely influential. And basically, she apparently played a major role in getting several senior officials fired from the Pentagon. Mm-hmm. Officials that would tend to have a more restrained attitude about U.S. power projection. So this administration has gone in every kind of sort of terrible direction when it comes to the Middle East, and I would not expect any kind of reasonable behavior on their behalf. In terms of the possibility of an uprising in the Arab world, I don't. That's really the last thing I've heard anybody in the West talk about or think about is the idea of agency among Arab people. Between the Gulf, between the GCC countries and their oil wealth, or between a lot of what's going on in Syria and Lebanon and whatnot, I think they're just betting on these communities are too divided. Some of them are wealthy and just don't want to rock the boat and don't want to are willing to make a lot of sacrifices in order to have a good relationship with the West. And that more can be demanded of them without things really breaking down in a way that harms the West. And they're taking a chance about that. I think they know that.
Finally, I have just 2 points. I know I have kept you so long, Mr. Ahmed, but so interesting, such an interesting topic, and you're such a great writer and speaker. I want to ask you about the fact that, I think if I'm wrong, again, you can correct me, wasn't Qatar kind of a contributor to the Jared Kushner portfolio? I don't know what they call these investment things. Do you think Qatar might be doing behind the scene kind of twisting arms through its investments in the US and Europe, because they can't just accept the fact that they were bombed and the fact that one of their citizens was killed, and you saw the emir by himself there attending the funeral, and actually he had more Hamas members come from outside Qatar to attend the burial of the son of Khalil al-Hayya and the other Palestinians who were killed. Don't you think that they might be doing something economic?
I mean, they have a lot of different sort of their lobbying capacity and their network is significant. But if it didn't stop the U.S. from authorizing a strike on Doha, again, half an hour away from the U.S. military base, that obviously is not working. It was actually Jared Kushner's father asked Qatar for a quote unquote investment back in like 2016 or 2017, or I believe 2017 or 2018. And Qatar said no because they were worried about it looking like too much of a bribe. And then basically Jared Kushner in the Trump administration was a major reason why the U.S. sided with Saudi Arabia during the sort of GCC conflict between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And the Qataris, I mean, I've heard Qatari officials say, listen, if we knew they're asking for a bribe and this was going to be the consequences, we would have just paid them. We would have been willing to pay the money. But they didn't understand that at the time. So this time they showed up with a $400 million plane for Donald Trump. And even that wasn't enough. So I don't know where there is a kind of strategic insolvency here with the Qataris. The money, the networking, the lobbying, the fact that they have that U.S. base there. I mean, when Qatar pays, $5 billion for, I believe, like 24 French fighter jets, that's not how much those cost. They're trying to win Western favor by massively overpaying. And if none of this avoided this from happening, I don't know if Qatari officials have a clear idea of what their next step is. I'm not aware of it. I don't know what that would be. So they certainly have a lot to think about. Yeah.
You mentioned Europe, and you said that it is becoming, it's going back to its old colonial and hegemonic mentality. And we saw how they all sat like school kids in front of Trump at the White House. Not that he knows anyone where they come from or what the geography or the languages they speak, but what about what is happening in Europe with all these, for instance, demonstrations? I'm not sure if you followed yesterday in Britain, in the heart of the country that created the State of Israel and created the British Mandate and made me be living outside my home country. Do you think any of this will lead to change in leadership in Europe? We see, for instance, how progressive the Prime Minister of Spain publicly coming out more strong than any Muslim nation, for instance. Do you think what's happening in this generation, the younger generation, but also old generation in Europe, that they can change things, stop their leaders, or no?
I mean, I think that's part of the Israeli calculation of like they have an unprecedented moment of strength with unlimited Western support and money and weapons. And at the same time, they know what the polling data looks like. They know that their support is crumbling all across the West. Their support among the Republicans in America, among like any I saw Megyn Kelly saying the other day that like everybody under 30 is against Israel, including the Republicans. So they know what's coming, and they feel like whatever they're going to do, they have to do it quickly. Now, the elites of these countries have tried to contain the sort of popular, they've tried to keep popular intention away from actual policy. Not the most democratic thing, but that is essentially what they're doing, where like in the US, you have a Democratic Party and a Republican Party who are maintaining a pro-Israel consensus despite support for this having significantly fallen off. The same thing is very much happening in Germany, where you have 8 different political parties that are all maintaining a pro-Israel consensus and defying their public, and they're being rewarded for it by networks of very powerful donors. And Israel has invested a lot of money in Germany in order to build up lobbying operations there. The German media is very pro-Israel. You have similar things in France and the UK. So the elites of these countries are kind of trying to ward off anti-Israel sentiment in their countries for as long as possible. Does anybody think this is really sustainable in the long term? No, but they're hoping they can keep it going for a while, potentially for another decade. And a lot can happen between now and then.
And finally, how is the genocide going to end in Gaza? Do you envision an end to it, or Trump will get his Riviera on the Mediterranean?
I mean, he's not going to get any kind of Riviera. That's too far fetched. But I honestly, I'm at a loss as to think of how this would end. I would have, 2 years ago, you told me that this would still be going on right now. I would not have believed you. I honestly wouldn't have believed that the European countries would still would be funding it and arming Israel, the entire way. Perhaps naivete on my part. But I honestly couldn't tell you. I wish I had a better prescription. I don't know how this ends. It just does. It seems to be on skates, and it's just going to continue where there's just no country that has the will or the capacity to do anything about it.
Could they push them to the Sinai, to Egypt, and jeopardize the security and the statehood of Egypt?
I mean, I think eventually they're going to go in that direction, but that's the point where whether or not the Egyptian government can survive that is going to be it's going to be a much more potent issue than it is now. At that point, are they going to care? I don't know. But at this point, I mean, I don't know. It is gut wrenching to watch every day. And knowing that this is just there's no end in sight here. it is baffling how this has been allowed to continue.
I want to thank you, Ali Ahmadi, Executive Fellow, Geneva Center for Security. Thank you so much. It has been a very interesting reading your article and talking to you. It's disturbing, of course, what you have been saying, but thank you so much, really, Mr. Ahmadi. I have enjoyed talking to you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Our listeners, you were listening to what is being done to other parts of the world. I don't know how you feel, but quite disturbing. Let me just read the title of his. Let me read the title of his article here. If you want to go to it's called the Cradle.co. The THECRADLE.co. The Cradle, and the title is, let me see, Goodbye, War on Terror. Hello, War on Arab Sovereignty. I'm not sure how you feel, but I really am laughing here because I can't believe what he was just telling me, that, they're playing with the livelihoods of people. Let's see if there are any emails here. Okay, let's take a short break. I know we're running out of time, but let's listen to Reem El-Banna, and this is True Talk on WMNF 88.5 FM. If you have any comments, please send them to dj@wmnf.org.
من قال أنك ظالم لا تنفعل من قال أنك معتدي حررت حتى السائمات غداة أن أعطيت أبراهام حقل محمد وجبلت نوابا لنعبدهم وهم مستعبد يبكي على مستعبدي.
This music is by Reem El-Banna. She is a Palestinian born in, I think, Haifa or Akka. North of Palestine. I met her many years ago when I went to visit Palestine for the first time of my life, and unfortunately she died very young from cancer, but that's her music. If you're interested, her name is Reem R-I-M Banna, last name B-A-N-N. I had wanted really to play a clip from the former U.S. Special Ops. His name is Tony Aguilar. He's a retired Special Force Green Beret. And because so many people talk about the aid and aid station, and Israel denies that it's depriving the Palestinians from food, and that there is no genocide going on, there is no food shortage, and this person no, actually he didn't volunteer. He signed up because he gets paid. He's a former U.S. soldier, special operations. But I think we're running out of time. But talking about freedom of speech, I hope that those of you out there listening and following the policing of free speech would be paying attention to what is going on and how it is difficult now for certain stations and certain media to be open about discussing difficult topics. Thank God we have WMNF, and I think next month, I can't remember which day, maybe the first week, we're going to be fundraising for True Talk. So I hope you will keep us on the air, Ahmed and I. He is traveling today. But please, next month, when it's time to support WMNF and support freedom of speech, please don't forget to do so. Thank you for tuning in. And if you have any comments, then send them to dj@WMNF.org, and NPR News, The Scoop is next.